This is Left Voices for Thursday, March 6, 2014. I'm Andrea Sears. Tonight,
the question really is, where are those cores? Have they largely been contained within the containment structures, or have they actually burned through the containments and are just sitting in groundwater? And we really don't know.
3 years after the tsunami hit Fukushima, the disaster continues. Tuesday, March 11th, is the third anniversary of the earthquake and tsunami that devastated the Tokyo Electric Power Corporation's Fukushima Daiichi nuclear complex. The initial release of radiation was estimated at between 10 to 30% of the radiation released by the 1986 Chernobyl disaster. 300,000 people were evacuated from the surrounding areas as 3 of Fukushima's 6 reactors melted down. Explosions released radioactive steam and debris into the atmosphere. The GE Mark I boiling water reactors feature pools packed with tons of spent nuclear fuel rods perched precariously on upper floors of the now heavily damaged buildings. Millions of gallons of contaminated water is being stored in fragile steel tanks on site. Tons of highly radioactive groundwater underneath the site are pouring into the Pacific Ocean every day. And another earthquake or an industrial accident could compound the problems many times over. The Fukushima Nuclear Accident Independent Investigation Commission report declared it a man-made disaster, saying that the direct causes of the catastrophe were foreseeable and that plant owners and government regulators had failed to meet basic safety requirements. Now, 3 years after the tsunami hit, TEPCO is still fighting what may be a losing battle to contain the damage. Kevin Kamps is the radioactive waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear, a Washington, D.C.-based educational and advocacy organization. Kamps says the crisis is far from over.
You've still got 3 melted down reactor cores that need cooling on an ongoing basis. That's where that flow of 300 tons of radioactive groundwater into the ocean every day is coming from. And you've got a storage depot of 1,000 plus tanks that are holding about 140 million gallons of highly radioactive water that are very precarious, and they have very bad leaks on a fairly regular basis. Just a week ago, they had 100 tons leak into the ground, and it was off-the-charts radioactive water containing strontium-90, which is a deadly radioactive poison. And then you've got the removal of irradiated nuclear fuel from Unit 4, which is going very slowly, and there's still the risk of that pool simply collapsing and a radioactive fire dwarfing the releases of the past 3 years taking place. And then the Unit 3 pool is kind of a big question mark. It's so radioactive and so wrecked that we don't really know what's going on in there, although Arnie Gunderson at Fairwinds Associates has documented 50 tons of extraneous debris in the Unit 3 pool from the largest of the explosions on site. Any one of these things I've mentioned would be major news if it happened all alone. All of this is happening all together at Fukushima Daiichi.
What are the current dangers for escalation of the crisis? I know that they're trying to remove nuclear fuel from the Unit 4 reactor, which is so precarious. Unit 3, the removal of the debris has to happen before they even get to the spent fuel in that pool. Are these the biggest concerns right now?
They are very big concerns. An earthquake that drains either of those pools, a drop of a heavy load, for example, as they move the fuel out of Unit 4, they're using a waste transfer cask. And when it's loaded with waste, it weighs 90 tons. If they were to drop that, it could simply punch a hole in the bottom of the pool and drain away the cooling water. An earthquake could drain away the cooling water. Within a matter of hours, the waste could be on fire, and those radioactive releases would be directly to the environment because these pools are open air. They're not even surrounded by the industrial buildings called reactor buildings. Those were destroyed by the explosions 3 years ago. So that would be an instant catastrophe if that were to happen, and that's why they're trying to get the fuel out of the pool. But it's going agonizingly slowly, And they're actually doing the easiest stuff first. There's probably fuel in the Unit 4 pool that's much more corroded because they use salt water for cooling for a certain period of time, and also bent or damaged or broken. And so we'll see how this progresses.
If there is a fire, what is the process? How does this result in a catastrophic release?
Well, the zirconium metal that's used as the cladding around the fuel rods is highly flammable. Once it hits its ignition temperature, which is less than 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, it will then burn like a sparkler. The flame would simply move down the fuel rod, and it's a pyrophoric and an exothermic reaction. It would just be a self-consuming fire that would spread to any nuclear fuel near enough to be sparked by the fire. And then adding water at that point would simply worsen the situation. So this would be like a wildfire with radioactive waste in the pool. Once it starts, it's not going to be able to be put out because the water in the pool is actually the radiation shielding for the workers. They're still getting gamma ray doses working around the pool, but without that radiation shielding provided by the water, those doses would be instantly fatal. So humans would not even be able to approach the pool to try to deal with it. And we saw what that kind of looks like back in 2011 when the presumption was that the Unit 4 pool was empty of water. And they actually were using helicopter water drops to try to get water in there. They were picking up seawater, dumping it on the roof, hoping it would somehow reach the pool. And that's what they'd have to try to do again, but it would be too late.
And what would be the atmospheric release?
It would dwarf what's happened in the last 3 years. We're talking an order of magnitude more hazardous radioactivity, especially in the form of radioactive cesium-137, which is a human muscle seeker, up to 100% that's in the pools, and there's massive amounts in the pools could escape in the fire and blow with the wind and just fall out over very long distances.
There are 3 melted down nuclear cores at this point. Where are they? What's the possibility, or is there a possibility of containment?
Yes, Units 1, 2, and 3 melted down in the very first days of this catastrophe, although Tokyo Electric and the Japanese government hid that fact for several weeks until they finally admitted that they'd had meltdowns. They have admitted a couple years ago that the meltdowns were ex-vessel in their nuke speak, which means the meltdowns melted through the bottom of the reactor pressure vessels and the molten core fell onto the floor beneath, which is a part of the radiological containment structure. We know that the containment structures in Units 1, 2, and 3 are damaged, if not destroyed. And that's why, as they pour cooling water on these molten cores as best they can, it's picking up so much radioactive contamination because the containments are damaged or destroyed, and it's simply getting into the groundwater and eventually the ocean if they can't capture it. So the question really is, where are those cores? Have they largely been contained within the containment structures, or have they actually burned through the containments and are just sitting in groundwater? And we really don't know. When they've tried to send probes deep into the hearts of these melted down reactors, they break down very quickly. The radiation levels are so high that robots and mechanical probes or the electronics are instantly fried when they try to send those in. So we don't even know where the cores are exactly.
So are we looking at a variation on the China syndrome here? Or maybe it's the Rio de Janeiro syndrome. It's not going to burn through to China. It could be burning through to the southern hemisphere and this side of the planet.
Well, yeah, the China syndrome is just a loose term, but once cores reach groundwater, it is possible for steam explosions to occur if molten core is concentrated enough to have a steam buildup that then explodes and forms a geyser, I guess you could say. But we're pretty darn close to that. I mean, maybe not in terms of explosions underground, but certainly the releases of radioactivity that TEPCO is willing to tell us about eventually over time, sometimes 6 months late, sometimes years late. There are just massive concentrations of radioactivity in various parts of the groundwater under that site, some of which flows into the ocean on a daily basis, some of which they're able to capture and redivert to this storage depot that is itself another huge shoe. If another big earthquake strikes that site, these 1,000-plus tanks that are holding close to now 150 million gallons of highly radioactive water could simply give up the ghost. They're not well built. They're breaking down just on their own, let alone from seismic activity. And if that water goes into the ocean, that's just going to be another chapter to this nuclear catastrophe.
And what is getting into the ocean? What's the potential impact there?
It's often expressed as 300 tons of radioactive groundwater per day, and that's on a good day. That's flowing into the ocean, uncontrolled, uncaptured. That converts to about 80,000 gallons per day of radioactive groundwater. And it contains an alphabet soup of radioactive poisons, tritium, which is radioactive hydrogen, which, if you listen to the nuclear establishment, no problem, tritium's no big deal. It exists in nature, they say. Well, it exists in nature because of cosmic radiation at a level of about 324 picocuries per liter. The measures on the groundwater at Fukushima are many orders of magnitude greater than that in terms of tritium. And tritium, being hydrogen, only radioactive, can go anywhere in the human body that hydrogen goes, which is everywhere, right down to the DNA molecule. And believe you me, they say it's mildly radioactive. Well, something mildly radioactive in the human DNA molecule is a big problem. So it can cause cancer, it can cause birth defects, it can cause genetic damage. That's just one of the poisons. The other ones, which are pretty infamous, are cesium-137, a muscle seeker, strontium-90, a bone seeker. There's probably other stuff in there, plutonium-239, a speck of which can cause lung cancer if inhaled. So, of course, if it goes into the ocean, the food chain can pick it up, and we're at the top of the food chain, so that process is called bioconcentration of radioactive hazard. And there's even the dynamic of the radioactivity just washing back up on shore and attaching itself to a piece of dust, so that could be a inhalation pathway for plutonium, for example.
And what about the contamination of seafood?
Yep, that's a very big issue and should be of great concern to Americans because we have one of the worst standards in the world for radioactivity in food. Our standard is 12 times worse than Japan's. So Japan allows 100 becquerels, which is a radioactive disintegration per second, 100 becquerels of radioactive cesium in a kilogram of food. In the United States, we don't allow 100, we allow 1,200. So it's very possible that contaminated food from Japan is being exported to countries like the United States. It's not seen as fit for human consumption in Japan, but it's legal here. So seafood is certainly implicated. In fact, from the beginning of this catastrophe, there's been a growing list of species of fish and other seafood that are contaminated at various levels. But because of our lax, weak regulations in the U.S., it's probably showing up on dinner tables.
There's been a lot of talk about learning the lessons of Fukushima because we have reactors of the same GE Mark I design that are still active here in the United States. Have we learned the lessons of Fukushima? Are the preventative measures being put in place, or are these reactors being closed down?
Well, a little good news. The people of Vermont and the state government of Vermont learned the lesson of Fukushima before it happened, actually, but especially so afterwards, and forced Entergy Nuclear to shut down Vermont Yankee this year. It's unfortunately still operating, and Entergy has said they will shut it down by the end of this year, so let's hope they can manage to shut it down safely without melting it down. So that's some good news. Vermont Yankee shutdown is one of the first. We had 5 in the U.S. last year, and that was after a very long dry spell of 15 years. So 5 shutdowns in the U.S., 1 in Canada. That is the lesson from Fukushima Daiichi. So, yeah, in some places the lesson has been learned, but the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, for example, recently voted by a vote of 4-1 to not even require filters on U.S. Mark I's after Fukushima. So they're taking their sweet time to apply these lessons learned. I'm talking years into the future from now. And what it's all about is saving the industry money. The industry's already in dire financial straits, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, instead of protecting the public, is protecting the bottom line of the industry and not requiring these safety upgrades.
Kevin Kamps is the Radioactive Waste Specialist at Beyond Nuclear, based in Washington, D.C. This has been Left Voices for Thursday, March 6th, 2014. You can help support this experiment in independent journalism by visiting our website at www.leftvoices.net and following the link at the top of the page. Join us again tomorrow for more news and information from a progressive perspective. I'm Andrea Sears for leftvoices.net.